Go.
Great. Well, welcome one and all to the May 2nd meeting of the Technical Advisory Group to the Vermont Public Utility Commission for the Clean Heat Standard work. I'm Rick Weston, Chair. I ask that TAG members keep their cameras on, but all other folks keep their cameras off. And when anyone's not speaking, please remain muted. Let's see. We have some uh, uh, experts from Efficiency Vermont who are joining us today. Alan Sherman, David Westman, and Ben Plotzker. I just want to make sure folks are aware of that.
That's Adam Sherman.
Oh God, I'm sorry. What did I say? Forgive me.
Is Alan Sherman like someone from the 1960s?
Well, I betray my age. I
Yeah,
betray my
okay.
age. Yes. Hello, Mama. Hello, Papa. Right. Okay. Let's see. Catherine, do you want to? You've got some words about the transcripts, and then I've got some other comments I want to make.
Yeah, so let me just respond to a request that we had at our last meeting from a member of the public that we have transcripts provided, and we did look into that. And there is the capability under Zoom to produce a transcript, and we actually tested it, generated it. The good news is it works. The bad news is it's not very user friendly. It very lengthy and not
Me.
well formatted. And the other thing that we actually considered was the fact that it really needs to be reviewed in order to be considered, completely accurate. Somebody has to actually go through and read the entire transcript and make all corrections. We don't have the staff to do that. So we're going to suggest that as an alternative, we would be happy to offer this transcript to anybody who requests it with the disclaimer that it is not necessarily an accurate transcription. It has not been reviewed and therefore cannot be considered officially part of the record. So that's our suggestion for how to address that concern. And in addition, I mentioned last time, anybody who wants captions in real time during the meeting or for the recordings is able to generate or create those captions. You should have that option under either your more settings. That's where it is for me. At the very top of my more list, there is captions, and you activate that and you will get the captions. And it can also be activated in the recording. So when you review that. So we're hoping that is at least partially responsive to the requests that we had.
Great. Thank you, Catherine. Okay, in light of some of the discussions that we had during our last meeting, I feel the need today to take several moments to remind folks of the TAG's purpose and processes so that we all have a better idea of what to expect from these meetings and from the work ahead of us. The TAG has been convened pursuant to statute for a particular and limited purpose to advise the Vermont Public Utility Commission on matters relating to the design and implementation of the Clean Heat program. Those matters are specified in statute and in the rules and procedures that also pursuant to the statute the PUC has set for us. TAG's work, though open to the public, is not a public engagement process. There is no requirement that the TAG take public comment during its meetings. That said, we very much welcome public comment, and in the limited time we have to do the challenging work with which we've been charged, we try to set aside time at each meeting for such input. But it's important to keep in mind that the TAG is not a decision-making authority. That power lies, as it should, with the PUC. Furthermore, this is a rulemaking, not a contested docket. This means that we have the opportunity for freer dialogue among the parties, interested persons, the TAG, and the PUC. And this means that anybody can talk to anybody. And I certainly encourage folks to track me down and speak with me at any time if you have any questions or anything that you'd like to discuss. But I want to emphasize that the best way to ensure that one's perspectives and ideas are heard is to submit them in writing to the PUC and TAG. They become a part of the record in this way, and we read them. I have so far, in our meetings so far, I've left the question of public comment during the breakout sessions to the discretion of the breakout group leaders. My own feeling is that there's barely enough time in those sessions for the TAG members themselves to engage on the questions with which they're grappling. But for now, I'm not going to make any changes to that approach, and I will leave it to the session leaders to allocate time if they feel that they can for public comment. There will, of course, be public comment in the meeting in chief, and again, opportunity for written comments. As I've said before as well, the TAG does not take note of comments posted in the Zoom chat by non-TAG members, with the exception of web page links that are posted to accompany comments made during the public comment period. The reason for this is straightforward. Commentary and argument posted while the TAG conducts its business are the equivalent of speaking out of turn or simply interrupting, actions that would not be countenanced if we were all convened together in a single meeting place. Some of you may find this frustrating, but I emphasize again that this is not intended to forestall public comment, but rather is intended to enable the TAG to most efficiently do the work that it has been appointed to do. And again, written submissions are the best remedy for this. Lastly, the TAG was deliberately designed by the General Assembly to be populated by individuals and representatives of organizations with diverse and at times opposing interests. Without contraries, said William Blake, is no progression. There were one or two comments, both oral and in the chat during our last meeting, that could be reasonably interpreted to impugn the integrity of one or more of the TAG's members. Those comments were uncalled for. That someone has an interest, pecuniary or otherwise, in the outcome of this rulemaking is not proof of disingenuousness or even of an inclination toward disingenuousness. We are debating issues about which reasonable people can and do disagree. And I do not, of course, begrudge anyone his or her outrage. But outrage is a motive, not an argument. I ask that we all constrain ourselves to facts, data, analysis, policy, and our shared obligation to the public good. Thanks. On to the next agenda item, Catherine.
That would be the minutes for the 4/18/24 meeting, which were linked in your agenda for review.
Right. I hope you've all had a chance to review them. Are there any discussion, any suggestions for changes to them before we vote to approve?
Michelle.
Yes, a quick question. I did note that the minutes stated that the intent of the pacing breakout was to meet again, and that was as of the end of that meeting. Would it be appropriate, or do we need to add a note that we were not able to have that interim meeting of the breakout group? Again, it stands as they stand. That was the intent when those minutes were completed. So simply asking a procedural, because that didn't happen, or do we just note that in this meeting's minutes?
I would think we note that in this meeting's notes.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks. Anything else? I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes. Matt, second? Well, we don't second, right? Is that right, Catherine? We don't need to second?
Right.
Okay, all in favor signify by putting up their, if you can, your raise hand sign. Well,
Got 8, and
people
maybe
are still looking for the button, but yeah, that sounds like we've got it. Okay.
one abstention. Michelle,
Yeah.
I'm assuming you're abstaining since you weren't there too. So Emily,
Okay, that's fine.
2 abstentions.
Okay, let me turn it over to you, Catherine, for well, Deirdre, updates for the from the PUC.
Yes. Okay. So, for what's on the agenda there, so not much to update on S305. So that's the bill that is in terms of it's the housekeeping clean heat PUC bill, but it has 2 significant changes for the clean heat standard, moving the DDA appointment date, changing the appointment date to more of a budget and plan approval date from the PUC on the DDA in September of next year, and also the registration date for fuel dealers from January or any date set by the PUC to June 30th in future years. That's still in the House Ways and Means, so no significant news to pass on for that. Update on vacancy nomination. So I should be able to share a solicitation with this group soon for you all to share with your networks. It is going to be a more narrow solicitation, really looking to fill the seat with a technical skill set that's similar to what the seat was vacated by. So Michael Wong was the member who left and had a very significant expertise in life cycle emissions accounting, specifically GREET. So the commission is really interested in filling that seat with someone with comparable expertise. So I will share that solicitation once it gets posted so this group can forward it to their networks. The third thing on there is the revised PUC work plan. It's essentially, and again, this is not the TAG's work plan. This is the PUC's expectation of interaction with the public, getting feedback from the public. So it's essentially reactive to the feedback that we heard from this group and the public that discrete items was overwhelming and not helpful. So this kind of attempts to just group like items together and also approach it a bit differently rather than having the comment periods be really open-ended, have straw proposals to be in those requests for comment or really targeted questions so we get less high-level feedback and more specific feedback. So it's really kind of a sequence of how we plan to address the items that we think would be valuable to get feedback for to develop the rule. And I think that's it. We did, I did confirm to Matt yesterday that the commission is in the process of formalizing a response to both TAG's motion and VFDA's filing late last week on when the obligation period would begin. So that should be coming out very soon. And I think that's it. Does anyone have any questions for PUC updates? Not seeing any. I'll pass it back to, I guess, Rick to introduce the next agenda item.
Great. Thanks, Deirdre, very much. Really appreciate it. Let's see. We're 2 minutes ahead of schedule. This is great. We're going to hear next from Opinion Dynamics, the PUC's consultant, who has shared with us their measure list. I just feel I've got to note this as well. We've had this conversation before. The way the statute is written and the way our rules and procedures are have been adopted by the written and adopted by the PUC. It's the tag is actually, interestingly enough, in the way I read it, we're not empowered to actually suggest altogether new measures. But we are empowered to comment, dig into, and analyze the measures that are being put before us. It's a subtle nuance there. I suspect that the full range of measures, however, that we could imagine are already in some way or another covered by the list. But it's a nuance that I just want to remind us of. And if there were concerns about that one way or another, remember anyone, including tag members, can file comments with the PUC on these matters. So, okay. In any case, Opinion Dynamics is going to share with us their measure list. Looking for some feedback. I turn it over to Jake. Or Joe, excuse me, Joe. Jake Plummer. Sorry, I'm getting everything confused. I'm going from the 1960s to American football. Sorry, Joe.
No worries. Good morning, everyone. Zach, I believe, is going to share our measure list, so I'll wait for that to come up.
And it had been posted as well and shared with the tag.
Can everybody see my screen all right?
Now we can.
Excellent. Go ahead, Joe.
Great. All right. So yes, we wanted to come to the tag meeting this week to share our measure list. This is one of the first deliverables in our contract to put together the TRM for the Clean Heat Standard. So we're coming today to present it to you and collect any feedback or try to answer any questions you may have on it. First, I'll start out by saying that we largely look to the Affordable Heat Act and the specific measure areas that are spelled out in that piece of legislation to develop the specific measures that we added to this list. The specific areas are shown in column A. And they're numbered in column B. And then within that, we have individual measures. So in terms of developing the list of individual measures, we looked at what has already been done in the Efficiency Vermont TRM and the Tier 3 TRM. And we also looked pretty closely at the measure list for the potential study, because I know there's a strong desire among members of the tag to have alignment with that. So we did look pretty closely at that, and ultimately we did arrive at a list that is very closely aligned to what they had put together for their work. You can see that we added some additional categories to add some context around this. In column F, we delineate the source of the CO2 savings, be it efficiency. For example, in measure area 1, we're largely, there's really no fuel switching. It's largely thermal energy efficiency and conservation improvements. However, when we get down to measure group 2, the heat pumps, there's both efficiency gains and fuel switching that would be leading to the CO2 savings. We also added columns for the potential baseline fuels. A lot of these are based on the electrical mix in Vermont. So that's the Vermont mix ones, grid electricity for some of these. And then of course we have all the fossil fuels that are commonly used, as well as biofuels in some cases. Then moving to the right, we noted what fuels would be in the decarbonized or proposed condition, be it electricity or again, biofuels. And then in column I guess the final thing I'd point out is we added individual characterization. So for example, with envelope improvements, there's insulation and air sealing are the two main categories, if you will. And of course, within those, there's different permutations. For example, with insulation, there's roof insulation, wall insulation, et cetera. For simplicity, we're grouping them all under insulation. And yeah, so those are the characterizations. So that adds a bit more granularity to the measures in column D. And moving to the right, there's more columns to categorize the baseline equipment. Of course, that's an important assumption with energy efficiency or carbon saving measures. And then what you're switching to is in the proposed column, column K. Couple more notes, I guess, before I wrap up here. Columns M and N are just to give folks a sense of what's already been done in terms of energy efficiency is included in columns M and M. So M is the tier 3 TRM, what measures are in that, and then column N is the efficiency Vermont TRM. So you can see there's quite a bit of overlap, although there's definitely measures that are not in either one. However, many of the ones, at least in the upper half of the list, are in other TRMs. There's plenty of background material for us to draw from there. We do intend to look closely at the work that's already been done for the state of Vermont in terms of the two TRMs. However, we've been directed to not necessarily just adopt that work carte blanche, but to look at it closely and see if there's improvements that we think should be made, at least in the context of the clean heat standard. So we'll definitely be doing that. So I'll stop there. Any questions, comments?
Sure. I'll just start with one, and then let's go to others since I have the floor. On water heaters, you've got utility-controlled electric water heaters. So I recall, I saw this, I guess, yesterday. You're not thinking about, or are you thinking about heat pump water heaters that would also be utility-controlled?
We are, yes. Okay. I believe if we scroll to the right, Zach, I believe we did consider, yes, you could have electric resistance or heat pump water heaters.
Great. I didn't see it, sorry.
And Joe, if I can just add a little color there, I think, Rick, the way we're thinking about this is the characterization for measure area 4 will be characterizing just what benefits there are, if any, from the utility control and load shift ability, whereas measure area 3 would categorize the fuel switch / efficiency gains from a heat pump water heater. So if you had something that was both, I think the way we will design this is that you will stack them in order to realize both sets of benefits.
Got it. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Yep.
Ken and Catherine, I'll turn the management here over to you. Ken?
Yeah, it's related to that utility control, because that suggests to me, and tell me if I'm wrong, that the greenhouse gas reduction emissions are because the grid has a different carbon intensity at different times of day / year, which then, if you're going there, says, do we also apply that to, let's say, the big one, which is heat pumps, where heat pumps may have, my understanding is whole home heat pumps that replace the entire system, have a different demand pattern than those that don't. When it's really cold, typically, if it's not a whole home system, the whole home's heat is not supplied by just the heat pump. But if you have a whole home system, it really juices the demand during those peak times, which may very well be the times when the carbon intensity of the grid is higher. So so I'll go back to the question, is indeed that the basis of greenhouse gas reductions for a utility controlled hot water heater? And if so, then is that information going to feed into whole home heat pumps with regards to that we won't be just using a single grid value for carbon intensity, but a time dependent grid carbon intensity?
Yeah, I can just say in general, yes, we will, anything involving electrification, we will be looking at the time dependent emissions. So we'll be looking at the load shapes of the measures and then how those align with the carbon intensity on the grid. With regard to the utility controlled electric water heaters, that's a topic we need to look into. I think first we'll look at whether the current programs run by utilities in Vermont, do they actually lead to load shifting that does align with carbon savings? If not, then maybe we could look into what would need to change for them to do so. But it's an area we need to investigate further.
And just to, again, add a little bit of color to what Joe's saying, I think the reason we've included this utility controlled electric water heater, which is a little different than these other measures, is because it is explicitly called out in the legislation, right? I'll be honest, I'm not sure this would have made the cut with what we know right now about the Vermont grid if it wasn't. So
We've had a long history with water heater control programs, so
I'm sure.
I think an old affection there.
Right, let's move to TJ and then Patrick.
So, related question, I guess, and I guess I was a little confused with the two responses there. What exactly do you mean by grid electricity when you're talking about potential proposed fuels or even baseline in this case? But are you meaning the Vermont portfolio, like either before or after the disposition of RECs, which is pretty clean, or are you meaning the marginal emissions, short-term marginal emissions, ISO New England? And I have a follow-up.
Yeah, so it's something we're talking about now and just getting into, but I think definitely the marginal emissions, I think, will be key for most of these measures. By grid electricity, we're talking about the mix of generation sources that are on the grid. But again, we will be focusing on what fuels are displaced, in this case by the load shifting that's occurring, and what fuels are being added.
Right. So we've internally had an awful lot of discussion about this over the last couple of weeks, and I think Matthew a couple of weeks ago raised this in either in the full tag or the biofuels group in terms of the NV5 potential study was originally proposed to use marginal emissions, and I think I could get behind a short run marginal emissions for a load shifting, which is a very short term type measure, right? It doesn't have long persistence. You just do it and get a response right away. For these long-lived measures, the discussion we've been having is something that whether we should be using more of a long-run marginal emissions, which would really be something closer to the Vermont portfolio. And so the department actually is leaning heavily towards directing NV5 to use the Vermont portfolio as the new fuel for the long-lived measures as a proxy for what a long-run emissions rate would be. And so that's what your added load would be associated with, Vermont's mix. And Vermont, not the marginal emissions in the short run. And so I wanted to make sure the tag is aware of this, because this is a really interesting issue. I'll just use that word. Vermont right now for clean for tier 3, the utility requirements, when they add a heat pump, they use the Vermont portfolio or a proxy of that to account for the emissions associated and the fossil fuel associated with the new load. Efficiency utilities, when they save energy, use the ISO New England, an estimate of ISO New England marginal mix. And so there's a big difference there. And I really think all of our policy should be consistent. This tag can't address all of our policy, whatever way it goes. Like inconsistency drives inefficient outcomes. But I guess I think we should. We're leaning towards going to the Vermont mix as the new proposed fuel, and just want to be at a minimum. We have to be consistent with opinion dynamics and NV5's work here. Otherwise, it's going to be chaos.
Great. Well, thank you for that context. It's just definitely a topic. We actually have that on the agenda for the next time we meet with PUC staff. So looking forward to that discussion.
Patrick, and then Emily.
Hi, thank you. I have a two-part question, and one is following up to that conversation you just had and TJ's question, and so I'll start there, which is when I think about the fact that these the CI impact of, I believe, all of these measures is supposed to be evaluated on a carbon intensity basis. Stopping at what just makes me wonder how all these measures can get translated into what in a lot of other programs are referred to as fuel pathways, and whether maybe the Vermont mix is used as the default assumption for a pathway, but whether when people are implementing these measures, they can also install a low carbon fuel source. So if that was electricity, maybe they are installing solar along with the heat pumps, and they are developing a fuel pathway that can be incentivized through the CHS to spur innovation, and they would reap more incentive if they get below the Vermont grid mix, which I know is pretty low anyway. So that's one question, is how can all of these measures be translated to life cycle fuel pathways? The other question is about the biomethane characterizations or measures, and whether there's a distinction being made between biomethane and biogas. And I asked this a few tags back when we first looked at this, but I think of biomethane as another word for renewable natural gas, which it seems to be treated as here. Biogas can be used to also make electricity and could lead to a fuel source for some of the electricity characterizations. And so I'm wondering if biogas is being considered, if it's being considered as part of biomethane, if it's being distinguished. That's my second question. Thank you.
Yeah. So I think the fuel pathways framework is something we'll have to consider when we're assembling the TRM, and I think that could be a good way to look at these. We do intend to very clearly, I guess, call out the baseline and the proposed or decarbonized fuels. throughout the TRM, but I think that's it's a good framework to think about. So something we'll have to look at. In terms of the biofuels, Zach, if you want to scroll down. So we do delineate different sources of biomethane. And we have an expert, Kevin Ketchman, who's not on the call right now, who's much more knowledgeable about biomethane than Zachariah, but I think we'll definitely consider your comments and see if we can delineate between biomethane and biogas.
Patrick, you're still on mute, FYI.
Thanks. I'll just add that the simple distinction is that all of those feedstocks you're producing or you have listed there, they first produce biogas, and then that biogas gets refined, for lack of a better word, to become biomethane. And so that step makes it, turns it into renewable natural gas that can go into the natural gas grid. But the biogas alone is a fuel source, which can and is used widely in Vermont to produce electricity. So it seems like it should be seems to me it should have its own categories here.
Thanks, Patrick. Let's move to Emily and then Matt. If you can...
Hi. So I have a couple just clarifications about how this will be used. I'm familiar with TRMs in an energy efficiency context, and I just wanted to check. So my first question has to do with, I guess I'll start with the one about kind of lifetime, but this relates to kind of the changing grid mix and the changing fuel mix over time. For long-lived measures, are any of those assumptions baked in, like over the lifetime of the measure? Will there be assumptions about, you know, increasingly renewably generated electricity or increasingly renewably fueled sources over the lifetime of the measures? Maybe I'll just quickly ask these one at a time. I just have a couple of quick clarifications.
Joe, can I answer that one?
Yeah,
sure.
So I think, Emily, this goes to some of the stuff that Joe said a little earlier. Like I don't hate to be too nitpicky about what we're talking about here, but I think like what your question is about more like the carbon intensity schedule, right, that we are using for the underlying fuels, which is something I think per the conversation about the Vermont grid earlier is something we're still talking about with the PUC. I think that I will just say from a positioning perspective, we'd really like perfect to not be the enemy of good here in the first version of this. And if there are reasonable assumptions we can make for electricity specifically about how the carbon intensity might change over time, I think we may very well try to work something like that in. But I think we're initially focused on making sure that the measures themselves are well characterized in a way that if we can make further carbon intensity updates over time to one parameter, great, but that we have everything else we need to sort of support that. I don't know if that answer makes sense, but I just want to, okay.
Well, and that relates to my next quick question, which is this updated over time? Like, is this envisioned to be something that's done once and then used for like 10 years, or is it intended to be updated every year? So therefore, like, you know, 5 years later, if the mixes have shifted, that's reflected?
I think, and I hate to put you on the spot, Deirdre, but I think that's a question for the PUC. You know, I think best practice in my experience, and definitely what Vermont does, right, for TRM type documents in general, is that they do have regular updates because things change, right? Building stocks change, available equipment out there changes, and underlying parameters like grid mixes or carbon intensities of fuels in this case may change. But our scope of work and contract with the PUC is to produce an initial version of this document by the end of this year and to provide a little bit of additional support in early 2025. And I can't speak to what's going to happen after that.
Okay. Yeah, I'm assuming, unless Deirdre wants to pop on, that she probably doesn't have much update either, but that's just something to keep an eye on, is that the need to for ongoing maintenance and support of this and updating of this. And my other kind of use question about how this will be used is, with the exception of the measures that are specifically noted as being custom measures, this is all envisioned to be prescriptive savings. So we're not like, for example, we're using, if a heat pump is installed, we're not like doing really separate calculations depending on whether that person starts with propane or oil and what their existing system is, or is it going to be like, how prescriptive is it going to be, I guess is my question.
So I'll start, and Joe, come in and please add additional thoughts here. But so prescriptive means different things to different people, and we didn't, do as deep of a kickoff with you all as we did with the PUC, but we had some pretty detailed conversation with them about this. So we are viewing all of these non-custom measures as being, a form of deemed savings, meaning that the TRM will provide all the information that one needs to be able to estimate savings in a certain case. But there are different kinds of deemed savings. There are fully deemed, where you literally just have, okay, a thermostat saves this many units of carbon, period. But you also have what we would call, semi-deemed type savings, where it's, okay, in this situation, you put these inputs into an algorithm and you're going to get this result, right? And I think we have to do all of the work up to the point of deciding what goes in the TRM at the end of the day in either case, right? We have to do all the intermediate sort of measure characterization work. I think a really important long-term question here will be, what is the end form of each measure? Is it just one number or a set of 2 or 3 numbers for some specific use cases? Or and this is a question for you all, the PUC, about how these programs are going to be run. Are these programs going to be run in such a way that detailed site-specific information is going to be captured by program administrators in a way that would allow us to do site-specific calculations for every single measure? And again, our work will be able to support either one of those answers, regardless of where you all land. But I don't think that is a fixed decision right now.
Okay, yeah, so just flagging that as something for potential further tag consideration, because I do think, it would be good to have that conversation after we have a better understanding of how this program will actually be administered and what is feasible. I'm certainly not suggesting we should be doing full custom for everything. I just wanted to understand. Okay, so that's all really helpful. And then my last question has to do with advanced wood heating. So I have a question about a specific measure where, like, the residential advanced wood heating and actually CNI as well, it looks like the proposed equipment, like, which I assume is the measure equipment. So what's being installed is a wood stove. And I thought, I don't know, I guess when I think of advanced wood heating, and if Adam Sherman is on the call from Efficiency Vermont, then, he could weigh in on this too. But I don't think of it as a wood stove. I think of it as like a, fully automated, like, central pellet boiler or something like that. So I was surprised to see wood stove as a measure case for any of these, as opposed to some more like fully, centralized system, and was curious about that.
Yeah, thank you for that point. We'll take another look at that. We don't mean to tie this into wood stoves necessarily. We'll definitely look at more centralized systems.
Yeah, and I would recommend, if you could specifically consult with Efficiency Vermont on that. Okay, yeah, he's not on now, but I think there's been a lot of work done in Vermont on advanced wood heating and what that actually means, and Adam Sherman would be a good person to consult with. So it just would recommend that you do that behind the scenes.
Okay,
great, thanks.
So we have 3 more hands up, and I want to get to those questions. Just no, I think this is the question for us, right? Matt, you're next. So I hear you, but I do want to just urge folks to keep their questions short and succinct, and the answers as well, so we can get to everybody. Matt.
Yeah, I'll be real brief because I know there's background noise, but just for food for thought, speaking on behalf of the heating contractors, I would say, number one, Vermont, unlike other states, is boiler dominant. We're mostly hydronically heated state, which means we've got a lot of mini splits, which means we also have a lot of hybrid systems because we have a lot of older building stock. So thinking of going into homes and putting in devices, heat pumps, electric heating devices, there'll be a lot more mini splits, but I think there'll be the central units that work with furnaces and ductwork, number one. Number two, of course, we are a winter peaking state. So clearly, I think that we have to look at marginal emission rates, given that we are going to depend on the grid during the coldest nights in January. And if we're using electric heat, it shouldn't be, the emissions rate shouldn't be on the sunny, windy day in the spring or fall. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.
Brian?
Yeah, thanks. I'm going to go up to the thermal efficiency and insulation envelope improvements. Understanding that the Affordable Heat Act talked about the credits being about the avoided emissions from the fuel not used minus the emissions of the fuel that was used instead. It's well known that for particular insulation products that have highly different embodied emissions associated with them. This is more a comment and question for the TAG to take up is whether or not we want this measure mix to incorporate more than one pathway for insulation, particularly for insulation products, to at least acknowledge that some are going to be much better than others.
Can I just respond to that? Because I just think there is an important point here that I feel like we might have talked about in the TAG previously, but I just want to be very clear that we are not expecting to be characterizing embodied carbon in the physical materials used for these measures. We are expecting to be calculating life cycle carbon associated with fuels, which are a little bit different than things we would normally have in a TRM. But like we are not expecting, and happy to discuss it further, right? But currently to say, all right, insulation product X has this life cycle carbon because of how it's made versus insulation product Y, we are expecting only to be looking at the carbon reductions from the changes in energy use produced by the insulation product. So if that differs from others' interpretation, good to know.
Yeah, Zach, I acknowledge that right at the beginning of my comment. As I said, this isn't a question for you. This is a question for the TAG, whether or not we want to comment on different insulation and embodied emission insulation products in this analysis, with the possibility of making a recommendation to the PUC that, yeah, we think this would legitimately qualify as a clean heat measure versus this one, and we think either should earn less credits or maybe shouldn't be eligible.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for the clarification, Brian. And Floyd, last question.
Yeah, just real quick. Category 9 of the measures, the sustainably, so the main point I wanted to make was both renewable diesel and biodiesel use the same feedstocks. So if you're going to have two pathways for renewable diesel based on purpose grown and residues and waste, you should have the same ones for biodiesel. So my suggestion would be to add another row for biodiesel made from residues and waste. That's all.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Super helpful presentation. Deirdre, did you want to say anything about the schedule going forward? Do you know anything more about the next time we're going to be able to talk to Opinion Dynamics? Or maybe Josh, you and Joe can say something. Or Zach, sorry.
The only thing that, so we meet with Opinion Dynamics every other week. And I think, as looking at the schedule, I think the measure template structure is going to be in front of us soon. So I haven't, asked Opinion Dynamics to come in again, but that should be something that the TAG can react to soon. I think that's, Zach, I'm not sure if it's still tomorrow or nearby, but that is something that we expect TAG can react to soon.
Yeah, and we can talk with Deirdre at our meeting next week about when to come to the TAG to talk about that deliverable.
Great.
Great, thanks. So, Rick, do you want to introduce our next topic, which is
Sure. Yeah. We're now about 13 minutes behind schedule, but that's okay. Floyd Vergara, one of our TAG members, is going to give us a presentation for information purposes about what's going on the West Coast, the carbon reduction programs there, addressing a number of topics: life cycle assessments, carbon intensity, setting the carbon intensity targets, and generating credits. We're going to try to leave some time at the end for some clarification questions, but let me turn it over to Floyd right away, and let's move on. Thanks, Floyd. Really appreciate it. And thank you, thanks. Opinion Dynamics.
And Floyd, are you going to be able to share your slides, or do you want me to do that?
I can do it.
Okay.
Can you guys, everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right, let's see. Can everyone see my slide deck?
Yeah, it's not in presentation mode, but we see your screen.
Let's put it in. There you go. Does that work?
Yep, that's perfect.
Okay, well, I don't know why I'm way over there. All right, so last TAG meeting, I was asked to provide an overview of the West Coast experience with life cycle assessments, especially with respect to how that's used in the low carbon fuel programs in California, Oregon, and Washington. So I'm happy to do that, provide just a really high level overview. This is not intended as a deep dive, more of a 101, and to just kind of make sure everyone is on the same page. I know some of you are well steeped in life cycle assessments and that sort of thing. So apologies if this is too basic for you, but I wasn't sure what everyone's experience with these things are. So just wanted to start off at that level. So that's what I'll cover, as Rick mentioned. So the threshold question is, what's the relevance of the West Coast programs for Vermont, given that you're looking at clean heat measures and West Coast is focused on transportation. The West Coast states have combined almost 20 years of experience with low carbon fuel programs. California since 2011. And it's been, and all of these programs are based on fuel carbon intensity, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Those are determined through life cycle assessments, as you probably know. And these have been highly successful in California and Oregon. Washington just started their program last year and is still going through the data there, so we don't have much to report on that. But just to give you just a high level, a takeaway, the 2023 data just came out from California yesterday. Under the low carbon fuel standard, they have replaced almost 2/3, so 61% of the petroleum diesel market is now renewable fuel, and other sort of biofuels and electricity have really just been highly successful under these programs. In Oregon, 35% of the diesel fuel pool has been replaced by renewable diesel and biodiesel. And that program has been in place since 2016. Vermont's affordable heat standard and LCFS share important key elements, declining carbon intensity targets, as we'll talk about later. And then those targets and reductions are based on fuel life cycle assessment. And then the last point I wanted to make was, and I think this has been brought up by other TAG members before, no state is an island, no state can solve climate change. So it's important for the jurisdictions to be harmonized as much as possible in the way they address climate change and the methodologies for quantifying the benefits of policies. So that we're, all rowing in the same direction. All right, so we'll just jump into fuel carbon intensity and life cycle assessments. Just a little bit of background here. So the origins of a life cycle assessment go back to 2007, a series of white papers published by University of California at Berkeley and Davis, where they identified the importance of reducing fuel carbon intensity based on a full life cycle assessment as being a key element of a low carbon fuel standard for reducing transportation fuels. That's important because on the transportation heavy states like the West Coast, 40% or more of the state GHG emissions come from the transportation sector. So it's one of those sectors that could not be ignored, and a low carbon fuel standard is a primary way of addressing the GHGs from fuels. Life cycle basis allows a apples to apples comparison. So you're making sure that you're looking at the different types of fuels that could be used in that sector on the same level playing field, making sure that you're incentivizing and going in the correct direction, as opposed to inadvertently incentivizing fuels that may not take you where you need to go. And these, these sort of programs are very important for transitioning the states from a petroleum-based economy. And the last point I'd make is, there's a number of tools for carbon pricing that states can consider. California certainly considered a carbon tax. Another option was capping fuel emissions, and both of those were deemed not really desirable for a number of reasons. So the carbon intensity-based low carbon fuel standard was deemed the way to go for fuels. Life cycle, what is life cycle? Is GHG emissions. Just make sure everyone's on the same page here. So life cycle means the sum of all of the significant emissions from each step of the production, distribution, and use of the fuel. Interestingly, I looked at Article 18. I didn't see a definition for life cycle emissions, even though it's referred to in the definition for carbon intensity value. Both California and Vermont use virtually the same definition for carbon intensity value. And this really is the key metric for the low carbon fuel standard type programs, where you're doing that life cycle assessment, adding up all those emissions, and then expressing it as an intensity metric. In other words, a gram of carbon dioxide equivalent per megajoule of energy delivered. In the life cycle assessments done on the West Coast, you have both direct emissions and indirect emissions for certain fuels. The direct emissions are calculated, and we'll talk a little bit more about this with the GREET life cycle tool. Many of you have heard of that. For those of you wondering what that acronym stands for, it's right here. And really, it's just the master sheet for aggregating and quantifying, and then calculating the final carbon intensity. OPG is the model for calculating the baseline carbon intensity of the petroleum fuels. And then GTAP is the indirect land use change estimator. It's a computable general equilibrium model used for assessing indirect land use change associated with certain crop-based fuels. And then that change is then converted into emissions through the AEZF model. Okay, so here's a kind of simplified system boundary life cycle, cradle to grave, or well to wheels, as we call it, life cycle carbon intensity. So you're starting off with the feedstock. You're pulling it out of the ground, or growing it, or processing it from some other feedstock that has emissions associated with it, and then you're transporting that to the processing plants, refineries, and so forth, and then distributing that, marketing it, and then finally using it in the vehicle. CI targets, again, as I mentioned, this includes direct emissions and indirect land use change emissions when it's appropriate. And these targets are set for both liquid and gaseous fuels, as well as electricity. Thought I'd show you some examples from CARB's website. Here on the left side is the petroleum example for CARBOB. CARBOB is the petroleum portion of gasoline. And as you can see here, and these are illustrative numbers. Don't get too hung up on the the exactitude of the numbers, but what they show you is most of the emissions come out of the tailpipe, the vehicle side of things. There's, as I showed earlier, there's transportation, refining, and extraction from the oil well. All of those result in a petroleum baseline of about 100 for gasoline and diesel. And then for comparison, if you look at biodiesel made from cooking oil, you see the numbers to your right, very similar, except for the biogenic emissions. So these are the CO2 that's absorbed by the plants as they're growing. Those offset the emissions coming out of the tailpipe, and what you're left with are the other steps of that process, which is a lot lower. And you end up with about 74% on average, up to 86% or more reduction in carbon intensity relative to petroleum diesel. I thought it'd be interesting to show the electricity side of things on electricity for transportation. Again, this is from CARB's website, the Air Resources Board's website. You could see here that in a number of cases, biofuels can be on par or even substantially lower than the carbon intensity for electricity. When I'll let my colleagues from the renewable natural gas sector speak on that if when needed. But basically, when you take a look at the average grid electricity CI, even when you factor in the improved efficiency of the powertrain, you still get, carbon intensities on par with particularly waste-based fuels. All right, so GREET's been mentioned a lot of times. All three states on the West Coast rely on this. Basically, it's the gold standard, widely considered the gold standard of life cycle impacts estimation. And it quantifies a number of things: total energy consumption, greenhouse gas, and other co-pollutants, as you see here. This was created about 3 decades ago by Argonne National Lab. Widely available, it's publicly available, peer-reviewed, tens of thousands of registered users, including, of course, the West Coast regulatory agencies, as well as US EPA and United Nations, ICAO, and other users. And what makes this robust is not just that it's been peer-reviewed and used by many registered users, but it relies on a wide variety of very robust data sets. So EPA's eGrid for the electricity, EIA's, the Energy Information Agency Administration's energy projections, simulations, simulation programs, peer-reviewed publications, and government industry data. I'm not going to go through, the mechanics of GREET. I think that'll take an entire day. But basically, I just wanted to show you some screenshots of, I said GREET is basically one big spreadsheet. Here you can see how it is. Along the bottom, you could see the many different tabs related to the different types of fuels that are that have pathways that are approved in the low carbon fuel standard. Here are some user inputs with respect to electricity mixes and what sort of feedstock and fuel you're looking for. And then on the right here is the calculated carbon intensity of the fuel that you're looking for. And again, they have a wide variety of different fuels quantified under the GREET program. Here's another tab where you can see the emission factors and the wide variety of different pollutants that are quantified in GREET, as well as number of inputs that users can put in to customize, their analysis. GTAP is a very specific modeling program for certain crop-based biofuels. The determination by the states there is that there is some indirect land use change associated with the growing of certain crop-based biofuels. This is not directly measurable, so it has to be inferred through computer modeling. very complex analysis. There's quite a bit of uncertainty there. But GTAP, there's a number of different modeling tools for doing this. GTAP is one of the primary models for doing this. And I wanted to make the point here that it's the indirect land use change estimator that is permitted in the low carbon fuels standard, and it's actually hardwired into the regulation. This was created, again, decades ago. The states rely on it, as well as many other regulatory agencies. It's been extensively peer-reviewed. And again, it's used in conjunction with the AEZEF model for converting those land use changes, those inferred land use changes into emissions. So what do those carbon intensities look like after you do all these modelings? These are volume weighted and EER adjusted. EER is the powertrain efficiency adjustment. It's a ratio relative to the baseline powertrain technology. So here you could see renewable diesel, biodiesel, and so forth, along with their CI averages signified by the dot with the kind of the target dot here, the target dot there. The black dots here are the CI standard for last year. So you can see that the biofuels in general are way below the targets, and that's why they're generating about 80% of the carbon reductions in the low carbon fuel standard. Here are the volume weighted bubble charts for non-liquid fuels, including electricity. You can see here electricity being here, hydrogen's up here. The weighted average of electricity is right about just below 20 or so. And then biogas is there in the purple. So you can see most of those are well below the CI. And in the case of biomethane, it can be substantially below in the negative CI values. Okay, so how does the West Coast set carbon intensity targets? So the main basis for the CI targets are driven from the greenhouse gas scoping plan. This is established by statute in California. Not sure, I think Oregon has a similar process, but in California, there is an overall roadmap for getting to the state's policy objectives. It's called the scoping plan. It's updated minimum of every 5 years. And what it does is it lays out the roadmap for getting to a particular target. The last one that was done in 2022 sets a 2045 target for statewide carbon neutrality. So all of the measures identified there are put on a pathway or a glide path towards that target. It also is informed by feedstock and fuel supply projections, demand side projections based on the policies that have been adopted by the state and federal programs, some socioeconomic modeling, and also, importantly, public health impacts modeling. What you see here on the graph is basically carbon intensity targets as a percent. And the green line shows how well the program has overperformed. So they are undergoing a rulemaking right now to make the targets even more stringent. And then we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but the upside is if your fuel has a carbon intensity above the target, you're generating a deficit, and if it's below, you're generating a credit. The states have set long time horizons to provide regulatory certainty and facilitate investments. And then the last important point here that I wanted to make was these carbon intensity compliance curves are backloaded generally. In other words, they're steeper in the later years, as you can see here. And that's primarily to facilitate technology development and commercialization. And it also facilitates the rapid deployment of ready-to-use or drop-in sort of solutions to get those carbon reductions immediately while setting up the state for kind of longer term technology development and commercialization for very low carbon intensity fuels. Those percentages are then translated into actual carbon intensities on a gram CO2e per megajoule. So you can see here the table for diesel and their substitutes. And then I just threw in there one for conventional and sustainable aviation jet fuels. Not that we're talking about that here, but just so you can see what these things would look like for gasoline and diesel. And then once those are established, then you know, the fuel producers have a real clear idea of what the targets they need to achieve. All right, generating credits and deficits. Pretty straightforward. As I mentioned earlier, here's what it looks like mathematically. As I showed in the earlier graph, you have a CI standard, the difference between a CI standard and your CI for the fuel. If your CI is greater than the standard, then you're going to end up with a negative number in the parentheses here, and that's going to be a deficit. And if it's lower than the standard, this is going to be a positive number. That's going to give you credits. That's multiplied by basically the fuel, the baseline fuel that you're displacing. So this is kind of the counterfactual sort of thing. The C here is the conversion factor for converting from grams to metric tons. All right, and then just real quickly, I don't want to get too much into this GHG versus LCA emissions, but I know it's brought up. Just wanted to tee up for future discussion how this is done, or you know, how California and other states deal with it. So this is from the state's official greenhouse gas inventory trends report. So you could see here for heavy duty fossil diesel emissions, these are the emissions that are reported in the official inventory. But pursuant to IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change guidelines, they also track and separately report the biogenic emissions shown in yellow here that are mostly occurring elsewhere outside of the state. And you can do that and also get credit for that in your low carbon fuel standard. Those are completely compatible and copacetic. Nothing wrong with doing that. In fact, the IPCC guidelines, permit that and provide guidelines for doing that. That's it. Hopefully I stayed under my time, and happy to take questions.
Yeah, you were perfect. Thank you. And before we do take their first set of questions, just want to remind folks that this has been for information. This is not for deliberation. So we don't want to get into a debate on the topic. We want to make sure that everybody walks away with just a clear understanding of what Floyd's presented. So if we have clarifying questions, that would be awesome. Hand raising would be helpful. Ken.
Yeah, so is there because California's at 61%, you mentioned, of their diesel comes from a biodiesel, renewable diesel source. Do they then, what happens when they hit 100 and they still have to reduce the emissions? Is that a hot topic, or what's going to happen?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. To the first point, the University of California actually projects 100% petroleum diesel replacement before 2030, like in the 2028, 2029 timeframe, so just a few years from now, which is a remarkable trajectory for that. What happens after that is, at the same time that replacement of petroleum diesel is happening, there's changes in the fleet, converting from combustion-based to electricity-based. But even as that's occurring, the state projects a substantial presence of internal combustion in the state, even after advanced clean trucks, advanced clean fleets, and all these other policies are fully implemented. So I think 60% internal combustion, heavy duty, long haul sort of vehicles are still going to be on the road. not electrified by 2045. Those still have to be fueled. So yeah, the electrification is being rapidly accelerated under a low carbon fuel standard under this sort of life cycle accounting scheme that I just talked about. But at the same time, we're decarbonizing the fuel that is still here and will still be here in 2045. Does that answer your question, or wasn't quite sure?
Yes, thank you.
Emily.
In that last slide you showed, Floyd, with the yellow, the heavy duty diesel bio CO2, I just want to make sure I understood what that was showing. So what you were saying is that the way California accounts for emissions, it doesn't count the biogenic sourced CO2 emissions that might be happening out of state as opposed as associated with the biofuel fuel pathway. Is that what you were saying? And so that's what's shown in yellow, but it doesn't count towards the low carbon fuel standard.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Sorry if I was confusing there. So what the orange or red, I'm not sure. My wife tells me I'm colorblind, but the solid line shows the emissions occurring within the state. So that's reported as official inventory, right? The yellow area under that curve, that's the biogenic uptake. That's reported in other sectors. And so it's not counted towards the inventory, but reductions in that through a low carbon fuel standard can be given credits under the low carbon fuel standard. So the state is still reporting its inventory that's occurring within the state, and then the emissions occurring out of state, including the biogenics, are reported through a different reporting. The idea being that when US EPA reports the entire nation's inventory, that's all accounted for and reconciled in that way.
But you said biofuel uptake, which makes me think of a plant taking CO2 out of the environment, but did you mean emissions, or? I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's things like the carbon dioxide that's taken up by feedstocks as they are being grown. Typically that occurs out of state. And then those fuels are processed or shipped over to California. It's used here. The emissions come out through the tailpipe, and then you have to reconcile the upstream versus the downstream emissions.
Okay, I'm still a little confused, but I think I'll move on.
Yeah, like I said, I'm not an inventory person. We might benefit from having someone from PUC or somebody come in and talk about how inventories are done. But again, I just wanted to tee up how California addresses that, similar to other states.
Thanks. Brian, and then Patrick.
Thanks, Floyd. I think that was all very helpful. I just wanted to add on to your response to Ken. And I think you did a good job. The low carbon fuel standard in these states isn't designed to work by itself. It is designed to be a suite of complementary to these other policies, primarily to the economy-wide cap and invest policies that are implemented in these states as well. What it does is it says in the context of an economy-wide emissions reductions that you can get through cap and invest and trading through those allowances, we also want to ensure that we are getting these particular intensity reductions in the transportation sector as well. So really important to understand that it's part of this bigger policy context that is being implemented there. That's similar to what we're doing, but here this carbon intensity requirement in the clean heat standard is embedded into the regulation, or into the proposed regulation. And I think we need to work out how that actually complements what we're trying to do with reducing emissions through the clean heat standard.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I think that's an excellent point. Completely agree with you there that that the LCFS was designed to achieve carbon and co-pollutant reductions specifically from transportation sector, and cap and trade is economy-wide, as you mentioned. I I brought up the backloading part of it. I know that the statute sets forth the individual targets for the different milestones. I guess my point there being, we could recommend a straight line reduction, or you can take into consideration perhaps the need for market development and so forth. So, that doesn't necessarily have to look like a straight line. I guess that's my point.
Yeah, I think we're in this case though, we're a little bit constrained by the targets that we have and the way the law is written now, where it says that they need to be proportional by sector.
Okay. Good to know.
Hi, thank you, Floyd. Thank you for that presentation. I really just have a comment and a question, not really for you, Floyd, but for others who know more about the CHS and Vermont, which is, I just want to focus on the comment Floyd made at the end about how these programs he was talking about, and the LCFS in particular, are leading to substantial electrification while also decarbonizing the fuel sector that is going to remain, because there will continue to be trucks on the road for many years that people don't take off the road, in the transportation example. And I assume the same will be the case here for heating fuels in Vermont and for boilers in Vermont. And I'm not familiar with an analysis that has been done of that in development of the clean heat standard or otherwise, but I expect that exists and wonder if anybody else is and if they can point us to it, because it seems like it would be valuable information for the tag to have at its fingertips. And if I'm the only one who doesn't, then I apologize.
Can I ask that you save that question for the bioenergy breakout group discussion, so we don't get into a longer discussion here? Would that be appropriate?
Sure. Yeah, unless somebody just quickly says, yes, we have that analysis and we can share it. But absolutely happy to bring it up again later. Thank you.
And Matt, I think you're our last hand for now.
Yeah, just a quick question for Floyd. Floyd, as renewable propane, propane is used in the transportation sector, albeit a very small part of it, but it's used a significant part in the heating sector here. As renewable propane gains volume, is there a place for it in California under the low carbon fuel standard?
Yeah, I mean, propane is used in a lot of school districts, particularly in the rural districts. So converting those to a renewable fuel, I think serves the interests of the state. Renewable propane is a byproduct of renewable diesel production. So that is an interesting market for that fuel. And it could also be used as a feedstock for other emerging fuels. I think dimethyl ether is looking at that as a particular feedstock as well. So yeah, it certainly has pathways in California, and I haven't looked at those numbers, but I suspect they're probably growing. So.
Thank you, Floyd. Thank you very much. And again, the presentation itself has been posted and shared with everybody. So if you have follow-up questions, Floyd, would you be willing to take those on in via email?
Sure, happy to.
Great. Well, we're about 15, 12 minutes behind schedule, but we'll crunch we'll compress things in the next hour and a half. I'd like to
suggest if we could take our break now and shorten it a bit, and that way we would all be back together before we go into breakouts. And I think that would work out better in terms of just transitioning to the breakouts instead of coming straight back into the breakouts.
Okay.
Do you mind if we just do that? And then we ask Matt and Emily for the Equity Advisory Group report as soon as we return. Can I ask folks we're going to cut maybe 2 minutes, 3 minutes off, and we return at 11:05.
Sounds good.
It's a little bit of a head start. 11:05. See you all back here. And for the individual just joining, we're going into a break right now, and we'll be back at 11:05. Oops, there he is. Adam, you just joined. Want to let you know that we're going into our break right now, and we will be rejoining at 11:05. So stand by.
Great. Well, welcome back. Emily Roscoe, Matt Cota, would you kindly give an update on activities with the Equity Advisory Group?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start with those two documents that Catherine has shared in advance. The first one is a description of Efficiency Vermont's low and middle income self-attestation processes. And attached with that is the PUC compilation of state programs. These are shared just for your awareness. The Equity Advisory Group felt it might be helpful information to share as we're starting to think about low income, moderate income definitions and verification methodologies. And then there's also the equity framework that was shared in advance. And this is going to be used in decision-making processes in the EAG. And we also wanted to share it with the TAG and the PUC for consideration in our decision-making. And then a really quick EAG update. We have reviewed a draft report outline that Mia, our chair, created. And this will be what the EAG is responsible for producing by the end of our term. And we're just figuring out what topics are most important and what's practically possible to include in that. We shortly discussed the public engagement facilitator. EAG members are working with the PUC to share public engagement in member organizations and created a subgroup to support that effort. And we noted the importance of representing those in mobile homes in that discussion or manufactured homes. And then we had a discussion on credit ownership where the working group in the EAG is working on their second memo. And in the meeting, we discussed whether low-income weatherization programs should be the owner of credits upon origination. And next steps on this are to use our equity framework and rubric to address this question. So I'll hand it over to Matt if he had anything to add.
Yeah, that was really well covered, Emily. The only thing that I would add is just a broad discussion on the challenges that the Equity Advisory Group will have to make, not knowing what the amount that the consultants or the PUC will come up with to move the market to incentivize people to install clean heat measures or to have clean energy products delivered, because obviously that will inform what the cost of the credits will, or the ceiling cost of the credits paid to the DDA, and that will reflect the costs that those that do not reduce their fossil fuel consumption will pay. So if it's a small number, the Equity Advisory Group, I think, could make the argument that it is equitable. If it's a large number, it would be very difficult to make that, but we're waiting on that number, and that we understand it's going to take some time. And then the other point I will selfishly say, which is equity is not just about consumers, but it's about the marketplace, and ensuring that all obligated parties, everyone that brings fuel in or into Vermont are registered and accounted for, means a lot for those that are participating in this marketplace, are registering, are reporting their gallons. Because if 30-40% of the fuel suppliers aren't accounted for, then ostensibly they aren't going to pay any fees, which would dramatically change the market. And in a market in which we're delivering an essential commodity in the middle of winter, to inject that form of chaos in which the honest dealers pay and the dishonest ones don't, would have devastating impacts on consumers. And that would be inequitable.
Any questions for Matt and Emily?
Yeah, thank you, Matt and Emily. This is Rick. I'll just start. Emily and Matt, something I would ask the EAG to consider, or maybe you have. I went through the template, I guess you call it, or the framework rather, and I thought it was taken all in all, it asks good questions. It asks an analyst or or anyone to think hard about what the impacts of any particular measure or program would be, and make some decisions about whether the benefits are positive or negative. Where I thought it fell a little short, and I suspect you folks are thinking about this, is that while what's the word I want to say? It asks various questions according to certain concerns: availability of or accessibility to programs, costs, environmental impacts, so on and so forth. There are, I don't know, 5, 6, or 7 categories that you identified. What it doesn't do is, and this is very difficult, I appreciate, is rank the relative importance of the particular categories. In other words, is cost a bigger issue than, say, accessibility or one of the others? And it might be helpful for the PUC and any analyst and any of us if that kind of ranking could be at least considered, so that when programmatic decisions are made, the relative, some sense of the relative importance of the various categories. Does that make sense?
That makes sense to me. I think this is still a work in progress and will be, so that's great feedback, and I'll relay that to the EAG.
Any other questions? Emily, Levin? You're muted. We're not hearing you.
Sorry. I was just looking over the rubric, which looks like it'll be a very valuable tool. Can you just clarify, it's all like, what is being scored? It's the proposed action, but is the proposed action like a clean heat measure, or can you just say a little bit more about the intended use of this?
So the proposed action, and Matt, feel free to jump in too, from my understanding, is broad to keep it broad. So it's not focused on a clean heat measure. I think originally the language was measure, and we opened it up so that this could be used more widely. So I think that the use is open for decision-making processes. Matt, did you want to add any clarification on top of that?
I'm sorry, Emily, could you reframe that question?
I'm just trying to picture how we're actually supposed to use this rubric and what an action is. So like basically the idea is that any recommendation, clean heat measure, approach to credit ownership, like any approach or way of doing things that we recommend or the PUC develops as part of this process should be run through this rubric to make sure that it doesn't exacerbate inequity.
Yeah, I don't think I can answer that. I don't quite know.
I think that that's something that the EAG is talking about, is specifically how the PUC and the TAG is going to use this document and maybe adding in more specific language. I think that term you used, there was a quick discussion about that and keeping it open so that this can be used beyond just measures. But hearing your question, maybe the EAG can come back next meeting with a more defined, I think, guidance for the TAG to use this specifically. Does that?
Yeah, and
Emily?
in particular, I could see this being like so applicable to absolutely everything that it ends up being not used at all. Like, and that's, I would want to avoid that. So I think it to the extent that EAG can provide specific points in the process or like examples of how you would like to see the TAG use this, like, at the point of having the draft clean heat measure characterizations, every measure should be run through this, or like the, credit ownership proposal should be run through this or something like that. Like I just want to make sure that we have like more explicit guidance and we don't forget to do this stuff because it's kind of a little bit general and all encompassing. But we're like, oh, well, it's so big that it maybe doesn't apply to this specific thing when you intended it to apply to this specific thing. So I guess that would be my request.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Emily. I do think that it would be worth, getting additional guidance from the Equity Advisory Group, but also for the tag itself to take up this discussion. But we didn't want to start that today, knowing that you would need some time to review it, some time to think about it. But we would suggest that maybe on our next meeting we could revisit this, and whether with additional guidance from the EAG, but still to have a discussion among yourselves about how you see it might be useful to your work. TJ?
Yeah, thanks. Along the same lines, I think it'd be helpful just to be explicit on the who is going to fill this out, if it is really the TAG's role, or it seems like it is to me, it seems like it's the PUC in design of the actual rule, and individual entities filing comments with the PUC could fill it out and to make their case. But I'm not sure if that's right or not, but so maybe that's just another discussion point. To Rick's point, I just wanted to throw out there that I don't necessarily think a ranking of the different priorities is going to be helpful or even achievable. And I think, to me, the point is more that we are asking the questions, and in the process of asking the questions, that the consideration of the different topics are kind of brought forward. And one of the problems in policy design was we haven't even asked those questions in a lot of instances. And so that's like a big part of the value. And then lastly, I just wanted to comment on Matt's point about kind of the equity in the registrants or non-registrants. I mean, this is probably a topic for another time. I don't know if the PUC has discretion in its rule to impose penalties and or not. That could be a solution to that, penalties for not registering. And I don't know what their enforcement mechanism is. It seems like they may not have that discretion and enforcement mechanism or even capability if, to go out and catch somebody. And so that is probably a discussion for another time, but one way to build in some safeguards there.
Thanks, TJ. Yes, and I would sort of hold a further discussion of that for later and move to Jared.
Hi, thanks. I think some of my comments are probably more for later as well. I did want to ask, and Catherine, I think you answered while I had my hand raised, about there will be some opportunity for more review and discussion. There was potentially some additional health nuance I wanted to bring up. My one question, maybe for Emily for now, is, and first, I really appreciate this. I think this is going to be a very useful rubric. So thank you for reporting on this from the EAG. I'm curious if anything resilience related came up in here, or maybe it's in here and I just haven't quite found it. I'm thinking about power reliance. I'm thinking about cooling capabilities, in terms of heat pumps. I'm thinking about ventilation and potential enhanced filtering related to like HRV, ERV technology. The potential co-benefit that certain measures can provide, hopefully benefits and not harms in terms of increasing climate resilience.
Off the top of my head, I don't have a good response for that, but I think that's helpful feedback to hear and a great question. So maybe Catherine and Rick, we can take time in the next meeting to start to compile this feedback and have more discussion around it.
Great, thank you.
Okay. So noting that we are still behind schedule. Oh, I'm sorry. Luce?
Hi, I just wanted to make a comment, and this isn't related. This is a great rubric. It seems a little subjective to me and maybe a little more definition and discussion on some of the how you fill this out. But I just want to make a comment because I can't go to the bioenergy breakout group is what Patrick was talking about, large boilers in our state and how we're going to deal with those. And a lot of the school districts and hospital, et cetera, use number 2 fuel. And if you can convert that to a biodiesel, that might be the bridging concept that we need until hydrogen is available or other technologies. So anyway, just throwing that out there when that breakout group goes and has discussion this morning. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So we are going to go to breakouts, and we are behind schedule. We do want to save time at the end for public comment. And just want to set up maybe for Rick, you want to raise the issue about sort of the timing of where we're hoping some of these breakouts can lead to in our next meeting, whether we are, we're ready for potentially starting the more of a tag-wide deliberation on some of the topics.
Oh gosh, yes. Well, I am aware, and I'll need some help here. Deirdre might be able to remind me, or you, Catherine. The PUC is looking for some feedback from the tag as soon as possible, especially with respect to credit ownership. In fact, by next week. Now, I don't think that's going to be it's not going to be possible that for the tag to come to any conclusions about credit ownership at this point. The subgroup, the breakout group, is still working through a number of issues, and there's diversity of opinion there. So we're not going to meet that obligation or that desired output. We can, however, I think, and this is true of the other breakout groups as well, I think it's possible for us to write a status report, though, something that we can send to the PUC about where we stand on these issues. Where our work stands on the issues and what we're, grappling with. And I think that'd be an appropriate approach, and it doesn't bind us in any way to anything, but it just explains, exactly where we are. Deirdre, you just came on, your screen came on.
Yeah, I think, and can you hear me okay?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's right. And we did give EAG a little bit more time on credit ownership too, recognizing that there's still substantive discussion going on. I think on a lot of these subgroups, we're going to need to start, the PUC is going to need to start providing expectations of when we need feedback on these things, because even though this is a rulemaking and we're accepting feedback until the fall, we need to have these subgroups move on to other things. So I think the goal right now is that something like the credit ownership, which has a really distinct PUC straw proposal attached to it, which is a little bit more concrete than what some of the other subgroups are working with, is to have reactions by like the 17th, I believe. I'll take a look at what the Dominic has shared with the EAG, and if that means that it has a list of things that there's consensus or, agreement on, and that there's a list of additional 3 things that there's not agreement on, that's fine. But just to kind of pass on that expectation, at least for credit ownership.
Thank you, Deirdre. That's certainly how I saw it at this point, that I think we will be able to reach some agreement on some matters, and we can elucidate the issues where we don't have agreement. And I think we can do that fairly and quickly. I hope so.
With that in mind, we're going to send you off into your breakout groups and to, thinking about, as you can pull out items that you can bring forward to the tag for full discussion, just keep that in mind. And as Deirdre said, we're hoping to get those to the tag as soon as you're ready. All right, so we have our breakout groups as before. The public is able to join whichever one they want. And I'm going to launch those breakout rooms now. And we have our point people that will be coming back. Let's stick with our schedule. So we've lost some time. Maybe make our breakout report back at 12:05. So we'll try to give you a little more time, but we don't have the full hour right now. So rooms are open. Go to your room and point people, remember to hit record as soon as you get started.
Would you remind us how to find your rooms? I've already forgotten. Oh, breakout rooms.
Yeah, it should pop up on your screen.
Well,
doesn't, go to more. See if you see it there. It's not popping up on anybody's screen.
I did. I went to more. Yeah. And scrolled down.
You should have a choice between the 3 rooms. Is everybody finding that? Is it not working?
It's not popping up on mine. It looks like it's not popping up for others and under more.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat.
Yeah, it's not working for me either.
All right, let me close all rooms. Let me just check one setting. It should have worked before. It didn't ask me to assign you either. Let's try one more time just by opening them. Now I don't even have breakout rooms. Okay, there they are. So some people have gone to their breakout rooms, but those were people that were made co-hosts. Ken, you're a co-host. He's in bioenergy. Rick is in credit. Rick, it says you're in credit ownership. Are you not? You must have gone. But nobody else is. All right, let me see if I can figure out a setting behind the scenes. So look under okay.
Might I suggest the admin assignment? That might be a way to get around this.
Still not seeing it. I just reopened all the rooms.
Still not seeing it. Sorry.
All right, let's go for Floyd goes to bioenergy. Dave Westman goes to
credit ownership.
Credit ownership.
Thank you.
I'm going to do the Casey. You're going to bioenergy. Let's see. Sam, bioenergy. TJ, pacing. Emily, Roscoe. Where are you going, Emily?
Can I go to pacing?
Okay, yes.
Thank you.
Patrick to bioenergy. Luce, where would you
Credit
like?
ownership.
Ben Pulaski. Sorry.
Credit ownership, please.
Brian, bioenergy. Emily.
Pacing.
Okay. All right, now let me go to the public. Dominic, where would you like to go?
Ownership.
Riley A.
Ownership, please.
Nick.
Bioenergy, please.
Adam Sherman.
Bioenergy, please.
John Brabant. Henry Mauk.
John has a comment.
Please.
John Brabant has a comment. He'd like to go to credit ownership.
Okay. Stephanie Austin. Okay, Tom Nauer. That's right.
Bioenergy, please.
Justin Johnson. Justin Johnson.
He's got a comment.
Credit ownership, please.
Yeah.
How about Stephanie Austin?
Also credit ownership. And I'll identify myself since it's reported. Matthew Baker Poole, Department of Public Service.
Okay, where do you want to go?
Bioenergy, please. Thank you.
Stephen Dodge.
Bioenergy, thank you.
Raymond Albrecht.
Bioenergy.
Katie Eisman.
Bioenergy, please.
Dylan Gia.
Yes. Thanks, Catherine. Credit ownership, please.
Ben Blasky.
Credit ownership, please.
Anthea.
Bioenergy, please.
Alex Reese.
Excuse me, bioenergy, please, and thank you.
And 802, phone number.
This is Thomas Weiss. I'd like to go to pacing, please.
Great. I think I got everybody. Rick, you want to go first with the credit ownership as soon as we see everybody else rejoining?
Sure. Just tell me when to start.
There we go. Here we come. Okay. Hope I gave you adequate warning this time. So Rick said he would be willing to go first and just saying what key topics you discussed, what any, if any, agreements you reached or your next steps. Rick, credit ownership.
Thank you. You may recall that there's a staff, PUC staff credit ownership proposal. We've been responding to that. There are 4 questions at the end of it that we've been